Hey everybody, and welcome back to Ready Steady Play. Today I'm going to teach you how to play Century Eastern Wonders. If you haven't heard of this, it's the second in the trilogy of Century games, which starts with Spice Road, takes us into Eastern Wonders, and then finally to the New World, which is out next year, or possibly now, depending on when you're watching this. But Century Eastern Wonders is a 2 to 4 player game of trade and efficiency. You'll be moving little boats around the Mediterranean or Black Sea. You'll be moving little boats around the Far East during the Age of Discovery, trading spices between Europe and newly discovered lands. And what we'll be trying to do is find the most efficient way to do that, to trade the most spices with our ports in order to gain the most victory points and win the game. Eastern Wonders probably takes about half an hour to an hour to play, depending on how many players you've got and how focused they are on optimization. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you about the components in the box, I'm going to run you through how to set up the game, and then I'm going to tell you how to play it. Some people have had issues with fitting things back in the box once they've opened it. Let me show you the secret to making sure everything goes in the box and nothing gets jostled around. Check this out. On the top here, I've got my 4-player cards. Then I've got this commercial insert. We don't need that. Then I've got 2 rule books. 2 rule books, yes. 1 rule book for Eastern Wonders and 1 rule book from Sand to Sea, which is the combo of Eastern Wonders and its sister game, Spice Road. But we'll talk about that later. So we've got player tokens. Now pay attention here, because you'd think that you'd put all of these little cups in these little holders here. But you don't. There's a couple of cups here. And that's because we need everything to fit in nicely and not get jostled around. And let me show you why. So we've got here in this container one of the player bags. This contains all of the pieces for 1 player color. We've also got in here 4 water tiles. These plain water tiles, we can ignore those for now because they're only used in the other version of this game from Sand to Sea. We've got here the pink player color bag, and in here we've got 4 port tiles. We'll need these later when we're setting up the map. Those are important. Then what we've got in each of these little containers here are ports for a specific type of trading. So these are all of the T trading ports, and you can tell that they're T trading ports because of this T symbol. If all of this sounds a bit complicated, don't worry, because it'll all make sense very shortly. Underneath, we've got victory point tiles, and we've got the closed port tile on top here, because this is unique, and it's quite important to keep track of this one here. The rest of these are all going to be shuffled into a big pile later on, so you don't need to keep any of these separate. And then in here we've got ginger. This is just the same as the T ports. And more of these victory point tiles as well. And you can just put those down with the other ones. And we'll shuffle those later anyway. Then we've got in the top compartment here, black player pieces. We've got our actual T resources here. And underneath we've got these hold upgrade tiles. And more on what these do later, but just note that they were laying down in there. Blue player tokens here for the blue player. Then we've got a bag of ginger here. We've got our chili here. We've got our cloves underneath. We've got 2 of our 4 cups. These are going to be used to hold your spices. Then underneath here, we've got our 4 upgrade tiles. These are the same as the hold upgrades, which is why they're all in the same color. So we can just put all those together. And in our last 2 compartments, we've got 2 more of these spice trays. And then we've got our chili ports here, and more victory tokens underneath. And our clove ports here, and more victory tokens underneath. And that's everything you'll find in the box. So the first thing you're going to do when you're setting up the game is to build your map. Now, you can, of course, actually take various different approaches to this, but there is a recommended starting setup. So what I'll do is I'll show you the recommended starting setup for the map, and then I will explain how you can customize it. What you do is you take each of your 4 spice ports here, And remember, we can distinguish between these 4 types because they've each got a different spice on them. Then we shuffle these and remove 1 tile of each type from the stack. Once you've done that, you give these ones a good shuffle too. We're also going to need these port tiles here with the ports on them. What we don't need are these 4 sea tiles here, which are only used in From Sand to Sea, which is the combo of Eastern Wonders and Spice Road, its predecessor. So we can get rid of those for now. We'll revisit them tomorrow. So once you've shuffled those, you can take your ports, and these are going to be your 4 corners. And you'll put 2 tiles between each of your corners like this, and these are all just random. 2 more like this. Make sure you set them up so that they're facing you with their symbols on the left side. And then what we'll do is we'll have 2 at the top like that, and then coming back down the other side. There we go, look at that, isn't that clever? Then we just fill in the middle. Once you're done setting that up, you can go ahead and take your victory point tiles here. Now you want to give these a good shuffle as well, but make sure you keep the closed port tile there out of the way. That'll be used in just a minute, but we'll give these a good old shuffle as well. And then we'll take 4 at random and place 1 on each of these port tiles here in the corners of the map. Once you're done that, we'll take the top 5 tiles of the victory point stack here. We'll take the closed port tile and shuffle it in here. So this is going to appear in the early stages of the game, but you don't know exactly when. And then we'll just put those back on top and set this to one side. Now at this time, or some other time, because it doesn't really matter, you'll take these 4 bowls and put the spices in them. The spices have an increasing rarity. So the most common spice is the yellow spice, ginger. A rarer spice is the red spice, chili. Ooh, it's hot. The penultimate rarest is the green spice, which is, of course, tea, a famous spice. Finally, you've got cloves. Good for roast chicken. There we go. That's the rarest one. So once you've set that up, you've got a nice ascending order of rarity there in your spice bowls. Next up, we're going to lay out our upgrade tokens here, which are these red ones, and you can just put them along the side of the board in easy reach of every player, and you stack them according to their type, which is fairly simple. Just match up the symbols. The one pile to take note of is this pile here, which has victory points on it, and these are going to decrease as you go through the pile, so make sure that they are in an ascending order. Now that we've done that, what we're actually going to do is decide who's going to be the first player. According to the rules, this is the last person who was on a boat, but you can decide how you want to do this yourself as per the rules of your group. And then everyone's going to get a player board. Note that these 3 player boards here are all pretty much identical, but you're going to want to have them on the side with these upgrade symbols at the top, not on the side which contains both upgrade symbols and this century card symbol here. This is used for From Sand to Sea. There is one special board here, and this is for the first player, and it's got a slightly different symbol in the top corner, just so you can track who is the first player at this stage of the game. So give this one to the first player, and give one of these to every other player. Once each player has their player board, then you can all pick your colors. I'm going to be blue. Get the rest of these out of here. Now that you've got your player board set up, you can take out your player baggie here. In your player baggie, you're going to have a whole bunch of these outposts and a boat. Now you should have 3 spare outposts, which you can just set to one side. And the rest of these are going to be used to populate your grid here. So you're going to put them in nice rows along your player mat like this. You can stand them up. If you prefer, it's up to you. It's important to track which rows have become empty. So as you play the game, you're going to take these little outposts and put them down here on the map. As you remove them from rows, you're going to unlock bonuses and points. I'll talk about that in the rules section. But the reason you have 3 extras is just so that you have enough to put literally 1 on every tile on the board here. Of course, it's highly unlikely that you're actually going to put 1 out on every tile, but they just want to make sure you have enough to do that. So now that our 2 player boards are set up, we're going to set out 4 piles of spices that are going to be the starting options for our players here. One is 4 ginger, another pile is 2 ginger and a chili. The third pile is going to be 2 chilies. And the last one is a tea and a ginger. Starting with the player last in turn order, in this case pink, because blue is our first player, we can tell from the mat. Pink will choose one of these selections and then also put their boat down on any of the marketplace tiles that they wish. That's any of them that's not one of these ports with a victory point tile on it. So what they should be looking for really is where do they want to start trading and what do they need to do that. In this case, pink decides to take 2 chili and put their boat down on a trade tile here that will immediately allow them to trade those 2 chilies for a tea and 3 ginger. Blue player decides to take the 4 ginger here and puts their boat down here on this slot that's going to allow them to trade the ginger for a chili and a tea. So the rest of these spices can now go back in the bowls, and we're ready to begin gameplay with the blue player's turn. So we'll go through the rules of gameplay. It's worth noting there are a few differences between a 2, 3, and 4 player game, and I'll explain those as we go through the rules. So the very first thing we should think about is how to win the game. The player with the most victory points wins the game. Bet you didn't see that coming. There are actually 4 ways to gain victory points in this game. You can either collect these victory point tiles, which is, let's face it, the best way. Also, the first person to get 4 of these is going to trigger game end. And if that's the first player, then the round will complete and the game will end. In a 2-player game, that just means that blue will go, trigger game end, then pink will have a turn, and then the game will end. In a 3-player game, the next player would get a turn, and so on, until it went back to the first player, and then the game would end. The second way to get victory points is by building outposts. We're going to be building outposts on the trade tiles here on the board in order to trade with them. As we reveal outposts from our board, placing them onto the game board, we'll reveal these numbers. These numbers are victory points at the end of the game. I showed you this pile here, which is just upgrades that are worth victory points at the end of the game. Whatever the number is, that's what they're worth at the end. This upgrade tile here is also worth 2 victory points at the end of the game, in addition to what else it does. This upgrade tile here is worth 1 at the end of the game, in addition to its other effects as well. And the last way that you can gain victory points is that you'll gain 1 point for every cube in your hold at the end of the game that is not ginger, so not yellow. So for each of these other cubes in your hold at the end of the game, you'll gain 1 additional victory point. That's important to remember and easy to forget. Now we know how the game ends and where we can find our victory points, but how do we go about getting these victory points? Well, the best way to do it is obviously via these victory point tiles. They have the most points on them, and they're worth the most. There's quite a big variance in what these tiles are actually worth. So you can see here, we've got a tile that's 9 victory points, but is very cheap. We've also got a tile out here with a 16 on it, but they go as high as 20. Now, if you recall, our spices increase in rarity. So we're going to be going around the board and trading for those spices. On your turn, you can take a move action, a market action, a port action, a harvest action. A move action is simply moving around the board. Everyone's boat can move 1 space for free. If you want to move subsequent spaces, for every additional tile you move over, you must take 1 spice cube from your player board and put it onto the tile you moved over. Obviously, you probably choose to start with your ginger before moving on to the rarer spices, but you may need the ginger for trades later on the board. So you will have to think about what you need to do and where you need to go. Additionally, if you ever end a move on a space with another boat, you have to give that player 1 of your spice cubes as well. If there are 2-player boats there, you must give each player 1 of your spice cubes. So that's even more expensive. Once you complete a move action, you can do a free market, port, or harvest action. so you can follow up your move action with one of the other three. A market action is how we interact with the tiles on the board. When you perform a market action, you must first check to see if you have an outpost on the tile. If you don't have an outpost on the tile, you can place one. And the way in which you do this is by taking one of the outposts from your player board and putting it onto the tile. There are a few things to note here. When we go to put an outpost onto the market tile, we check what kind of market tile it is. You'll note that there's 4 different types, each matching the 4 spices available in the game. On our player board here, we've got 4 spices down the left side here, and they are in ascending order of rarity. Furthermore, each matches the symbols on the market tiles. So when we play a outpost onto a tile with the chili symbol, we take it from the row corresponding with the chili. If we wanted to play an outpost on this tile here, we would take it from the ginger row because it has a ginger symbol on it. You may also notice that down the side of the tiles here, there are 3 spaces for outposts, these faint white circles here. However, any number of players can have an outpost on a market tile up to 4. If you're the first player to put an outpost down on a tile here, then you don't have to pay anything at all. It's completely free. If you're the second player to put one down, it will cost you 1 per outpost on the tile. If you're the second player to put one down, it will cost you 1 spice cube per outpost on the tile. Except in a 2-player game. In a 2-player game, the second player must always pay 2 spice cubes. But in a 3 or 4-player game, it's 1 per outpost. So in this case, pink would have to pay 2 because this is a 2-player game. If it was a 3-player game, she'd only pay 1, but then the third player to come along and put one down, our white player here, would have to pay 2. And if the black player came along, the third player color, he would have to pay 3. I think it goes without saying that in order to carry out a market action, you must be on the tile where you want to carry out the market action. Once you've placed your outpost, then you can do the trade on the tile. In this case, our blue player will pay 3 ginger and gain 1 chili and 1 tea. And these will go onto their player board. You only have 10 spaces on your player board here in your hold for spices. If you have 10 spices and you ever gain any spices, you must discard some, but you can choose whichever to keep and whichever to discard. So you'll probably want to keep the rare ones, although maybe not in every case, depending on what you're saving up to purchase. The spices paid in the trade just go back to the bank. If you are paying to put down an outpost, the cube that you pay goes back to the bank, not to the player on the tile. If you can afford to trade more than once, you can trade as many times as you can afford to do it. For example, if our pink player here had a bunch more red cubes, for example 5, she could carry out this trade action twice. So in this case, our pink player would pay 4 red cubes and gain all of these cubes. Whoa! Just remember that she's got to have space for her hold, because she's just picked up 8 cubes, and that's most of her hold. If she would go over her 10 limit, she must discard down to 10, but she can choose whichever 10 she wants to keep. The third action you can do is a harvest action. So remember, this can also be done as a bonus action after moving, just like the market action and the port action. The harvest action simply involves taking 2 ginger from the supply and adding them to your player board. This is for if you go bankrupt, or if you just need a couple of extra gingers to complete your purchase. Final action we have to discuss is the port action, and this simply involves you sailing into a port and purchasing the victory tile there. When you purchase a victory tile, you must discard cubes equal to the cost here back to the bank. It must be the exact cost in the exact right colors. So blue player here, she's going to take these and return them to the bank. Once she's done that, she'll take her new victory token here and just put it face down next to her player board. This is hidden information that only she can look at. So yeah, the other players will know what you've purchased and might have an idea of how many points you have, but they'll have to track it the whole game if they want to remember, so there is a chance they'll forget. Once a token has been purchased, you can take a new victory tile from the top of the stack and flip it face up and put it down there. At some point as we progress through the game, this blocked port token is going to come out. The blocked port token is a way of forcing players to move around the map and interacting with the other ports. If one of the ports is blocked, it will remain blocked until someone purchases another victory point tile. If our pink player goes into this port and purchases this tile, then instead of replacing this one from the deck, we'll take the closed port tile, move it over here to this port, and replace the previously closed port with a new tile instead. So how do we get these upgrade tiles, and what do they do? Other than give you points? Well, let me explain. As you recall, we'll be taking these outposts off of our player board and putting them onto the game board. As we remove them, we'll be removing them according to the tiles on which we're placing them. If you manage to place one on each of these tiles, you'll complete a column. And when you clear a whole column, you'll get the reward listed at the top, which is this upgrade symbol. You can choose one of the 5 available upgrades to add to your player board. This one, in addition to giving you a victory point, will also give you a red cube every time you take a harvest action. So when you harvest, you'll gain 2 gingers and a chili. This one allows you to move an additional space on the game board without putting down a cube. So instead of 1 free move every time you do a move action, you'll get 2. This one's just worth points and has no other purpose. This one, in addition to being worth 2 victory points at the end of the game, means that whenever you play a new outpost on the board, you can take a cube from your hold and upgrade it to the next rarity. So I could, for example, take a ginger and upgrade it to a chili, or a chili and upgrade it to a tea. Finally, this one just goes next to your player board and increases the size of your hold by 3, which is pretty good. Now at the end of the game, you might wind up with a situation that looks a bit like this. So all you have to do is flip over your tiles and count up your respective victory points. So here, our blue player has actually got 83 points. She's got 54 here on her victory point tiles. She's got 8 here on her upgrade tiles. She's got an additional 17 here on her player board. And of course 4 for the cubes in her hold that aren't yellow. By comparison, our pink player has 67. She's got 55 here on her victory point tiles, 3 here on her player tiles. She's also got 8 here on her player board, and finally 1 here in her hold. So I guess our pink player should have been paying more attention to how many points the blue player had from putting out outposts and also from purchasing these victory point tiles here. Now, in addition to that setup I showed you, you can create any of these 3 shapes here. Note that these do include the ports, so you'll have to decide which tiles you want the ports to be. However, it also suggests that what you can try doing is simply shuffling up all of the tiles as you were shown earlier. Actually, I don't know if it really suggests this. It says, when you're creating a custom map, try to place 1 tile so that it's adjacent to 2 other tiles. So what we were doing was simply taking a tile off the top of this deck like this and putting it out like that, and taking another one off the top and putting it out like that. And what you can do is take turns drawing tiles from this deck and trying to place them so that they touch 2 other tiles. And you can just take turns doing this until you've laid out the entire map however you want. And then at the end, you just take these 4 and try to put them around the edges so that they're all roughly equidistant apart. And that's a fun way to build your own map and make it sort of a bit of a game during setup as well. If you'd like to see the game in action, I'll be sitting down to play this game with my friends Michael and Ollie in the very near future. So make sure you subscribe to the channel and stick around.